The forest at night has a way of swallowing sound, turning every whisper of wind into something deeper, something alive. That's why stories of Bigfoot have thrived for generations, because out there, under the thick canopy and in the cold breath of the wilderness, it becomes easy to believe that something enormous might be watching. Welcome to a journey into those shadows, where real people swear they've come face to face with something they cannot explain. These are the true stories shared by hikers, hunters, rangers, and wanderers who stepped into the woods thinking they understood nature, only to walk away with a memory that would haunt them forever. One of the most chilling encounters came from a man named Daniel, a seasoned backpacker who prided himself on being unfazed by the wilderness. He'd camped in remote areas for years, but nothing prepared him for what happened deep in the Olympic Mountains. Late one evening, after the fire had burned down to embers, he heard a series of knocks echo across the valley. They weren't random or natural, 3 sharp, heavy strikes against wood. At first he thought it might be other hikers, until he remembered he hadn't seen another person for 2 days. When the knocking came again, louder and closer, he felt a pressure in his chest that he couldn't explain. Moments later, the forest went silent, so silent it made the hair on his arms stand straight. And then came the scream. Long, drawn out, and unlike any animal he knew. Not a cougar, not a bear. Something deeper. Something upright. Daniel didn't stick around to discover the truth. He tore down camp and hiked through the night, refusing to look back even when he heard the crunch of heavy footsteps following behind him for nearly a mile. Others have described encounters not just with sound, but with presence, massive silhouettes that linger just beyond the limit of flashlight beams. In northern Georgia, a hunter known for his skepticism found himself rooted in place when he heard heavy branches snapping behind him. He raised his flashlight and saw 2 glowing eyes about 8 feet high. The creature didn't charge, didn't growl. It simply stood between the trees, towering and still, watching him with an unsettling intelligence. He reported that the smell was pungent, almost unbearable, and the stillness that fell over the forest was unlike anything he'd felt in decades of hunting. When he lowered his flashlight for a split second to adjust his grip, the creature vanished without a sound. What unsettled him most was not the encounter itself, but the realization that something that large could disappear into the woods with complete silence. But not all encounters are terrifying. Some are strange, almost curious, as though the creature behind the legend isn't always a threat. In the Pacific Northwest, a family camping near a river woke to the sound of splashing. The father peered out of the tent expecting a deer or maybe a bear, but instead saw a massive figure crouched at the edge of the water, rinsing something in the river. At first, he thought it was a large man, until it stood up. It towered over the water, covered in dark hair that glistened with droplets. As the father fumbled for his flashlight, the creature turned its head slowly, as though sensing movement. But instead of approaching, it took a single step back, then slipped into the tree line with surprising grace. The family left at dawn, but what stayed with the father was the calmness of the creature's motion, the almost human way it interacted with the environment, as if it understood it was not alone and chose to avoid conflict. Some stories, however, push the boundaries of the mysterious. A researcher collecting audio data in the Sierra Nevada captured hours of unusual vocalizations, whoops, long calls, and deep chesty grunts that experts have failed to categorize. Late one night, as he sat recording near a ridge, he heard what sounded like 2 creatures calling to each other from opposite ends of the valley. The tone of the calls changed. One sounded agitated, the other calmer, almost like communication. When he attempted to mimic one of the calls, the entire forest seemed to hush. Then a distant answering call came through the trees, much closer than before. It wasn't angry, just responding. As if acknowledging him, he shut off his recorder, not out of fear, but out of awe. For the rest of the night, the calls faded gradually, as though the unseen creatures were moving farther into the mountains, leaving him with a sense of having eavesdropped on something ancient. Legends of Bigfoot have always had roots not just in sightings, but in folklore. Indigenous tribes across North America have long spoken of towering, hairy guardians of the forest, beings that dwell between the physical and spiritual worlds. Some tribes describe them as protectors, while others warn of their temper, claiming they should not be provoked. These tales, passed down through generations, often include details that match modern eyewitness accounts. The height, the powerful build, the deep-set eyes that seem to hold emotion, the uncanny ability to move through dense forest without sound. Whether myth or memory, these stories create a bridge between the ancient past and the modern encounters that continue to surface. Skeptics dismiss these tales as misidentifications, bears walking upright, tricks of the light, or the brain's tendency to fill gaps in the darkness. And yet, the consistency of the stories remains hard to ignore. Witnesses from different states, different backgrounds, and different decades often describe the same features, the same behaviors, the same eerie sensations that follow the encounters. For many of them, the moment that stays etched in their mind is not the sight of the creature itself, but the overwhelming feeling of being watched by something intelligent, something that understands the forest far better than humans do. There are even whispers of encounters where people report gifts left behind, arrangements of stones, braided grass, or sticks carefully stacked in patterns too intentional to be natural. Whether these are the work of Bigfoot or simply the forest's oddities is impossible to prove, but they add to the mystery that surrounds these stories. One woman in Oregon found small piles of smooth river stones outside her cabin for 3 mornings in a row, placed neatly in the same spot each time. She lived miles from the nearest home and had no explanation for how they got there. The 3rd morning, she heard something large walking near the tree line and caught a brief glimpse of a shadow disappearing between the pines. She never saw it clearly, but she never found stones outside again. Whether these tales are proof of a hidden species, a psychological phenomenon, or something in between, one thing is certain: the legend of Bigfoot endures because it speaks to something primal within us. The idea that the world still holds mysteries, that there are places untouched by human understanding, breathes life into stories like these. When people step into the wilderness and return with trembling voices and wide eyes, they're not just telling campfire stories, they're sharing moments that change them. So as you listen to these encounters, let yourself wander into the dark corners of the forest. Imagine the crunch of leaves behind you, the echo of a distant call, the heavy breath of something watching from behind the trees. Whether you believe or not, the wilderness remains full of secrets, and some journeys, like the legend of Bigfoot, are too thrilling to ignore.